Hey everyone, welcome back. This video we're going to be talking about JavaScript variables, just the basics here, just to get a better understanding. Before we start, I'd highly recommend you check out our sponsor Dev Mountain. Dev Mountain is a coding camp that's going to help you take these JavaScript concepts and apply them to real-world problems and get a job in the industry. It's a very career-centric coding camp. Basically, when you go to one of the Dev Mountain coding camps, you're going to get what you need to know to be a developer in the industry, whether that's a JavaScript web developer, an iOS developer, or basically going into software engineering in any topic. They're going to give you the foundation. If you do it in person, there's going to be housing at no additional cost, but they also have online classes for those of you who absolutely can't do an in-person boot camp. But I'd highly recommend you just sign up for something because lots of people go from these boot camps straight into a really good job in the industry. Mention that I sent you their way and they'll give you $250 off the tuition. Alright, moving on to variables. We created a variable in the previous videos. You can see we got user input using this prompt, and this is a good way to get user input for now. But honestly, the prompts are really super annoying. So hopefully eventually we're going to be able to make a more pretty, less obnoxious way of asking people for information, such as a form on the web page or a nice modal that doesn't disrupt the page. Because like right now, if you refresh this page, like it's just like go away. It's like a virus, man. But anyways, it's a good way to start getting information and just being able to practice working with data. So for example, we can get a username like this. This is an example of a variable. In JavaScript is known as a dynamically typed programming language because the variables are not given data types. So we're going to get into data types soon, but basically it's a way to classify different data. So we've talked a little bit about strings, but there's also numbers and there's objects, and many other programming languages will require you to put that up front. So you might say something like int, but JavaScript does not work that way. This means you can assign anything to a variable, and then later you can assign it a different type. So for example, this is going to be a string. Well, then later on, I could say, hey, username is now a number. And that's totally legal because JavaScript doesn't restrict a variable to a specific type. This also shows that you can reassign to a variable. It's not a permanent thing. You can do this as many times as you want. And you can see we're not getting any errors. Once again, this equal sign is known as the assignment operator, and it basically takes anything on the right and assigns it to that variable username. So username now refers to hello. And one of the huge benefits of variables, well, we talked about one, it allows our application to be dynamic because we can get user input and we can just make things change on each execution. But another thing is it makes coding a lot easier because we can reference this name throughout our program. So for example, if we had a variable age and it had the value 5, well, we might want to print this 3 times. So we might say console.log, and what we might think is, oh, we just have to put the 5 in there 3 times. But now let's say I want to change this to 6. Well, now it's like, oh, I got to go in here and change 3 occurrences. That is like, whew, my hands are getting tired. So instead, what we can do is we could assign it to a variable and we can use that variable in our code. So anywhere that was expecting that value, we can replace it with a variable. This will just make our life a lot easier and reduce bugs. It makes our code more general, so it works with multiple cases. Because previously, these console logs only worked with the age 5 or 6. But now we can go in here, we can change age to whatever we want, and the code is going to work just fine. Here, I'm going to get rid of that prompt. It's so annoying. All right, see, it prints 50 3 times. Now, when you create a variable, it's actually a 2-step process. So let me just clean this up a little bit. Let's say we have age again, and we set it equal to 50. Well, this is actually 2 steps in one. There's a declaration, and then there is an initialization. So if we wanted to break this up into their individual steps, it would look like this. So we create age. This is the declaration. We're declaring that age exists, and then we're initializing or assigning a value of 50 to age. So it's 2 steps, and when you put it on one line, it's just doing both at once. Sometimes you might know that you're going to use a variable in the future, you just don't have a value for it. So in that situation, you might just declare it, but you might not actually initialize it with a value, and that's totally fine. The important thing to know is that until you initialize it, it's going to have the value undefined. So if I comment this out, do a little refresh over here, I type in age, it says undefined. If we were to go in here and type a variable that doesn't exist, it's going to give us an error. So this undefined only happens if the variable has been declared, but it hasn't yet been initialized. The other thing you should know about is that you can assign to variables using other variables. So let's see an example of that. Let's create a new age. And this is just some casing things. This is called camel case, where the first word is lowercase, and then any other whole word is starting with an uppercase. That is how you should probably tend to create your variable names. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign this age. I'm gonna put these a little closer together. Now I wanna go over here, do a refresh, and let's just work with these a little bit. If we print the value age, we get 50. If we print new age, we also get 50. So what happens if we assign age a different number? Now the question I have here, is this also going to update new age? Well, let's see. When we type out new age, it's still 50. So doing this assignment like this makes a copy of the value, meaning these two variables store their own data and they're not connected in any way. Once we get into more complex JavaScript and we're working with objects, this can get a little funky. Sometimes we can have variables pointing to the same data, the same object, but in the situation of numbers, it's always going to make a copy. The next thing I wanted to talk about is an expression. So when we do some complicated stuff that ultimately evaluates to a value, this is known as an expression. For example, we can go down here and we can create a variable called message. And this is inside of a string, so we're not doing an assignment. We are just printing this value later on. And then we could use a plus sign and say new age. So what's going to happen is it's going to print this string new age equals, and then it's going to print the value of new age. Well, this is an example of an expression. It ultimately evaluates to one string, one individual value. So you could go in here and type in message over here, or you can console log it. You'll probably see me do a little bit of both throughout the series. So when we console log this thing and do a refresh, we get new age equals 50. So this is a string. It's one individual value. So you can literally think of it as new age equals 50. So that's an example of an expression. It evaluates to a value. We're going to be using expressions all throughout this series. Now that we're done with expressions, we can move on to something else. And let me tell you, I cannot express how thankful I am for you guys watching this series. Hopefully so far it's been a good level of enticing, but not too overwhelming, but also not like, wow, this is super simple. I'd say we're starting off pretty beginner, but it's going to get pretty intense here pretty soon. But we'll keep it simple, don't worry. So thanks guys, please be sure to check out the links in the description and consider subscribing if you've enjoyed the series. I'll see you in the next one.